Hey everyone, it's Samuel, and welcome to Plot Hooks, the podcast where we explore the arts of narrative and collaborative storytelling in the world's premier RPG, Dungeons & Dragons. Today in the Prime Material, using the upper planes in your stories, Part 3. In the wilds, the Empyrean. And in the Tavern, what would you do if your map was fake? How's it going today, everybody? I hope everybody out there is having a great day. I'm excited to dive back into the upper planes with you all, focusing especially today on perhaps the most famous of the upper planes, Mount Celestia. But before that, I want to take a moment and address something which is far more important than me, than this podcast, than Dungeons & Dragons, or anything else in the TTRPG community. And that's the effects of systemic racism in the United States. As you are no doubt aware, yet another African American life, the life of George Floyd, was taken in the horrors of police brutality. Racism, as much as people don't like to admit it, is still a significant issue that carries life or death ramifications. And even when it isn't directly resulting in the death of African Americans, systemic racism is still negatively affecting them in tremendous ways through disparities in incarceration rates, wealth disparities, access to good schools and tutors, job opportunities, you name it, racism affects it and affects every aspect of the African American experience. And it's up to me and all my fellow white American citizens to stand up against this. Again, this is far more important than any podcast, than any role-playing game. It is a matter of standing up for what is right. So we're going to start this episode with some silence. 8 minutes and 46 seconds, to be specific. The amount of time that George Floyd was pinned to the ground by that police officer. I encourage you to not skip ahead in this silence. Use it as an opportunity to think about the ways that we can be better, and I will do the same. I know I have not always done the right thing, and for that I sincerely apologize. Remember the many lives that have been broken by white supremacy, not just George Floyd's, but all the others. And not just the ones which we see on the news because it resulted in death, but all those whose lives have been broken through the other systemic structures which are built to impede their progress. Let's take this moment to think, to reflect, and to remember that Black lives matter. Thank you. Thank you very much for observing that moment of silence with me. Again, standing up for what's right is far more important than this podcast. We jokingly call the main segment of this podcast the prime material, and despite the fact that I'm about to talk about Mount Celestia, the prime material today was that moment of silence, was our reflection on how we can all be better, and thank you for that. Now let's get out there and not just reflect and think, but do and act. As far as the announcements, remember to follow us on all our social media. You could find us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. You can find us on YouTube if you'd like to listen to the podcast that way. And a big announcement is that tomorrow, June 7th, our next D&D 5th edition supplement releases up on our Patreon. This supplement highlights the Ichmaset race, a unique people which dwell in Carrick's war wastes, but which you can also adapt and use within your own settings and your own campaigns. This release is fully laid out with great graphic design and features art by Devin Simmons, an amazing member of the Plothooks family. We hope you all enjoy the supplement, and we're excited to keep releasing more for you. All right, time to dive back into the upper planes. So this is part 3 of this series, so if you're interested in hearing the previous discussion that we've had, part 1 was episode 2, and part 2 was episode 17. The concept that we've been exploring is that as DMs, it's rather simple to use the lower planes in D&D's cosmology in a story because they're inherently evil. It's quite easy to have a quest to slay a nefarious being there, or to have a villain or even the campaign's big bad residing in one of the places like the Nine Hells or the Abyss. But this series has been looking at what story elements we can weave into our collaborative narratives to utilize the upper planes, those good-aligned planes in the multiverse. So far, in part 1, we've discussed this concept in a general sense, and then we look specifically at the neutral good plane of Elysium and the plane of Bitopia, which balances between lawful good and neutral good. In part 2, we looked at the lawful neutral, lawful good plane of Arcadia and the chaotic good, chaotic neutral plane of Eastgard. Today, we're going to look at Mount Celestia. Now, I've reviewed briefly the D&D multiverse and what is meant by these D&D cosmological terms in the last 2 episodes, so I won't do that again here, but just by way of quick reminder, when I say outer planes, I'm talking about those planes far from the prime material that are situated along the D&D alignment chart. There's 16 of them, each corresponding to a specific alignment or combination of alignments. And the plane itself, the outer plane itself, is defined by that alignment. Those philosophies are knitted into the fabric of what makes that plane work. And the outer planes that are aligned in some way with evil are called the lower planes, and those that are aligned in some way with good are the upper planes. And again, the one we're going to cover today is Mount Celestia, which is the plane aligned with lawful good. To give it its full name, it's the 7 heavens of Mount Celestia. And it, in many ways, is the place we most think of when we think of the upper planes. It is a place where pure righteousness, justice, order, grace, mercy, all these concepts reign supreme. The best of pure law and pure good. Everyone there tries to live as righteously as they possibly can. And angels and other entities vigilantly protect this place from any possible evil invasion. As the name suggests, the plane is comprised of a single, impossibly ginormous mountain that comes out of a beautiful ocean called the Silver Sea. The mountain is so large that it baffles you and fills you with a sense of awe just to look at it. In fact, it's so high that legitimately you shouldn't even be able to see anywhere close to the peak, but magically you can just barely see it far up in the sky. Several lawful good deities reside here, most notably, in my opinion at least, Bahamut, the Platinum Dragon, whose palace is found primarily on the second layer, but kind of shifts back and forth between the first, second, third, and fourth levels. Now, in the last episode, I talked about how I wasn't really the biggest fan of multiple layers in planes unless it was built into the fabric of the plane, like the 9 hells or the infinite layers of the abyss. Well, the 7 heavens of Mount Celestia is another example of where the different layers are a great part of the plane. As if the plane itself wasn't full enough of purity and righteousness, each successive level is even purer than the last. Incountable people seek to climb the heights of the mountain and reach the top, but very few, only the purest, are able to make it. And the climb isn't just hard because it's a difficult climb, it's also because there's many apparent paths to reach the next level, but only those who know about law and good are able to find the correct one. A series of trials generally await you as you try to venture up further into the layers. Now the question is, when you're talking about different layers and ascending up this mountain, what does it look like as you're ascending? Can you see the other layers above you? Does it look clearly like the mountain above you is segmented into 6 different things above the first layer that you're on? It almost sounds like you should be able to see the other layers nestled as you climb. But that would be weird because the layers are so different, even something as simple as the light source of what's around. In reality, of course, the outer planes are quite spatially loose as far as how they operate. And depending on your source, you'll get different answers on exactly how they work. And nothing has been canonized specifically as far as the specific layers in 5th edition. My main resource for this video is going to be the Manual of the Planes for version 3.5. But the way I like to think about this, which I think works best, is that whichever part of the plane, whether you're on the 2nd layer, 4th layer, or wherever you're at, all you see above you is this impossibly large mountain towering above you to those dizzying heights. And I think of it as never really getting closer. If you look down, if you're on the 2nd layer, you're clearly not at the base. You can look down and you can see that you are somewhere up on the mountain. You can see the sea below you. You can't really see the layers below you, but you could see that the mountain extends below you. But when you look up, the mountain is just so humongous and awesome. I don't really ever think of it as coming closer into focus until you're on that 7th and highest level. I like that the goal for each layer would be to climb to either a set high point on that particular layer or just one of the highest points on that particular layer, at which point you could maybe face a final test or something if you like, and then you'd be able to enter the next layer up at its lowest place. But regardless of what part of the plane you're on, it's just a beautiful and wonderful and amazing place to be. A place that is pure righteousness. Now, we're going to go over all the layers specifically and ways that we can use each layer in a minute. But first, how can we use Mount Celestia in general in our stories? Well, the main thing to me is I think it provides a great opportunity for an arc where your party is seeking to obtain something. And that's really just because of the whole way that the plane is set up. It's almost a built-in arc for a campaign. There's a quest-like reality to the whole fact of trying to get up to the next layer, to trying to ascend to the top of this mountain. There's so many opportunities for DMs to drop in challenges or combats for the party to prove that they're worthy as they seek to ascend Mount Celestia to obtain what they're trying to get. And they could be trying to get several different things too. They could be trying to get a certain item from a being higher up in the mountain. They could be seeking to enter one of the divine realms of the deities that dwell on the plane. They could be trying to find a specific being that perhaps had passed away in the prime material and now resides here. They could have been tasked to get up to a certain level and retrieve proof that they'd been there by some individual that wanted them to prove that they were trustworthy. There's so many different options for how you could frame it, but these types of prove yourself quests are just built into the plane so perfectly. The structure of the plane lends itself to this so well. In most planes with multiple layers, the idea is that you're going down into other layers. You start at the top and you're delving deeper to get to other locales. But here, the very process of proving your worth is framed around a literal desire to rise to greater heights. So it's almost poetic in the way that it works and the way that it fits a campaign arc like this. And with regards to the details of each specific layer, there's lots of different options for what you want that quest for the party to actually be. So let's get into the layers. The first layer at the base of the mountain is called Lunia, or the Silver Heaven. It's mainly comprised of the infinite ocean which surrounds the massive mountain, which, by the way, this ocean is saltless. It's an ocean of holy water. It's just pure, fresh water. Beautiful waterfalls cascade from up on the mountain and splash into the Silver Sea, which is full of life and glitters underneath the sky. The sky, by the way, is actually a dark sky, but it's filled with so many stars that it lights up the plain as if it was day. So there's no sun, but the stars themselves are so bright that the plain is completely lit up. Lots of cities and citadels are situated along the coast of the sea. This is the place where you typically arrive when you first get to Mount Celestia, this first layer called the Silver Heaven. So what's interesting here? What can we use? Well, the idea of various cities and locales situated around the base of this mountain is quite interesting to me, because these places have a wide variety of inhabitants and are even known to trade with beings, especially sea elves, from other planes. So what you essentially have here is a lot of heavenly port towns, and that could be a really interesting environment to build out and create for your campaign. There can even be some encounters with some evil beings, some seedy folk who perhaps have come to the plane just to mess with the place, but haven't been caught by the various angelic defenders yet. There's also the curious case, of the chaotic evil wizard Malhavik. Malhavik, for some unknown reason, despite his chaotic evil ways, had a change of heart and desired to learn the ways of good and law. And so he decided to call in some favors. How he got those, I don't know, but he decided to call in some favors with some demigods, and after proving the seriousness of his desire to those that guard the heavens, he was allowed to actually build a castle on this first layer as he attempts to change. He's not there yet. He's definitely not perfect, still has tendencies from his chaotic evil past, but he is there attempting to change. And in the meantime, he lets anyone stay as his guest, regardless of their alignment. And I love this idea. It doesn't necessarily have to be this particular wizard. It could be an evil wizard from the past in your setting that has perhaps set up this arrangement. But this idea of this chaotic evil entity, this entity which philosophically is diametrically opposed to the law and good that is inherent to this plane, is here learning on how to become lawful good, is here learning how to live righteously. That particular character that you create, whether it's Malhavik or someone else, can be a really interesting NPC for the players to interact with as they are there and perhaps just learning the ins and outs of what makes the first layer work and perhaps how they can figure out to get up to the second layer. You can have him turn out to actually be still evil. You can have the party tasked by an annoyed angelic entity to infiltrate his tower and figure out what's really going on. This could be just a really interesting thing to throw into this first layer. The second layer is Mercuria, or the golden heaven. The air here is thin, so depending on how you rule it as a DM, it might take some adjusting to acclimate here. Here, the light source is just a golden light that permeates the whole place. And here, as you're going up the mountain, you still have a ton of plateaus all across this massive mountain. And this is where the cities and towns and civilizations on this layer are built. Some lore also has this layer being a sort of armory for Mount Celestia, and a place where those good and noble warriors are buried in large mausoleums and tombs. And these warriors are remembered in an annual event on the layer called the Day of Memory. There are brooks and waterfalls which cascade down, going towards the Silver Sea below. Personally, I think this layer is a great one to use if the party is needing to find a figure from the past in your setting. If there's some sort of heroic, lawful good character from the past that they're trying to seek out to perhaps get some particular intel they need to fight a villain in their particular situation, this second layer is a place where they could certainly find this entity. This is also where Bahamut, the Platinum Dragon, makes his primary home. His palace is built entirely out of his extravagant treasure hoard. Even things like the windows are made out of gemstones, and the walls are inlaid with precious metals and jade, and the floors have mithril in them. It is an extremely beautiful and amazing locale. But it's not stationary. He can move it around at will with a whirlwind within the first 4 layers of this plane. So while it primarily resides here on the second layer, on Mercuria, it can be on any of the first 4 layers. And this actually provides an alternative method of getting to another layer. Not only can you just use perhaps the second layer as a place where the party has to get to in order to interact with Bahamut, but maybe they come across this palace and perhaps they can sneak aboard this palace and hitch a ride up to some of the higher levels to avoid some of the tests and trials and difficulties which might befall them as they try to ascend the normal way. And if you're friendly with the Platinum Dragon, you don't even really have to sneak aboard. You can perhaps just ask and be able to hitch a ride up all the way from level 1 all the way up to level 4. The third layer is called Vinya, or the Pearly Heaven. Here, the slopes, the hills, and everything that make up this massive mountain that slowly ascends towards its peak are quite gentle. They're old and rounded, and occasionally filled with snow. But the brooks and rivers that still run through here, going from the top all the way down to the Silver Sea below, still generally run warm and clear. There are also beautifully terraced fields and woodlands and forests which are carefully tended. It's just a beautiful mountainside paradise. One of the most interesting features here on Vinya is something called the Glass Tarn. And this is a mountain lake. It's filled with icy water, and it's in this sort of bowl-shaped valley, which is nestled between 3 different crags in the side of Mount Celestia. Of course, these peaks could be just mountains themselves in the prime material plane. They're only just little parts of the whole of Mount Celestia, though. But here, just essentially nestled within these 3 mountains, is just this mountain lake. And this is a wondrous, magical place. And whenever someone comes here and throws something that is truly important to them and valuable to them and throws it into this lake as an offering, all of a sudden light just rushes up out from the bottom of the lake. And when it reaches the surface, that light reveals a vision about the person that threw their offering into the water. Or if the offering was not legitimate, if it was something fake or if you didn't mean it, the light takes the form of a powerful entity who will deal with your intrusion. Reaching the Glass Tarn can be an excellent goal for your party to be achieving. They can decide to go here on their own to seek guidance regarding something that they're attempting to do, or perhaps they can even be asked to do this, perhaps by someone on their deathbed who wishes them to take this certain artifact to this glorious place they've heard about. Or perhaps this is an entity whose dying wish was for their ashes to be sprinkled here. There's lots of interesting ways that you can use the Glass Tarn. The lawful good halfling deity Yondala also dwells on this particular layer in a place called the Green Fields. Here the weather is extremely mild, and there's all sorts of wonderful fields full of crops which never fail, and harvests are plentiful all the time. There's no large predators here at all. There's just things such as squirrels and rabbits and moles, and the halfling entities that live here dwell often in either small buildings or burrowed homesteads amidst the endless fields of the area. This perhaps could be a place where the party needs to get to if perhaps a famine or a blight is a part of your particular campaign. Perhaps they need to get a particular seed or a particular item from this location and bring it back to the prime material to fix whatever problem they happen to be facing. The fourth layer of Mount Celestia is called Solania. That layer is also called the Crystal Heaven. Here, the sky above just shines iridescently with almost like a silver sheen that hangs above the slopes, which are quiet and gentle. There's lots of huge glaciers here, and the area is really rich in natural minerals and ore. The surface is a largely quiet place, and there's a lot of places like temples and monasteries and shrines and other holy places in this area, and a lot of times there are different sorts of interplanar travelers which will come here seeking to gain answers or seeking to meditate perhaps about the concepts of love or creation or work or hardship. Those type of pilgrimages, of course, can be part of your campaign, and that would be a way to hook in this fourth layer of Mount Celestia into your particular setting. This is also an area that's heavily populated by dwarves. Notice I said that the surface is pretty quiet. Underneath, there's lots of tunnels with a vast dwarven citadel called Arakanor. Here is where the lawful good dwarven deity Moradin resides. And this is quite literally a dwarves' paradise. You think that the stonework and the craftsmanship and everything that dwarves do and experience in the prime material is beautiful? Well, this is that times 1,000, where you can't even describe the beauty and the splendor of their work. Here are the mysterious soul forges, which dwarven worshippers say Moradin uses in order to temper his people and their weapons. Reaching this particular location could certainly be a plot hook to get your players to Mount Celestia, if for no other reason than to just obtain weapons and armor, because Arakanor has such a wealth of amazingly crafted weapons and armor. Moving on up to the fifth layer now, that's Mercian. Mercian is also called the Platinum Heaven. Here the slopes get even gentler, and as you can see, the further up the mountain we're going, it's almost like the plane is leveling off almost a little bit. But there's still an immense, enormous peak to go before reaching the top layer. Because of the slight nature of the hills here, there's all sorts of giant plains all over the place. There's lots of citadels here, which serve as marshalling grounds for various entities like paladins or celestials or other creatures of law and good. There's a particular city here called Imperia, which is also called the City of Tempered Souls. This city rests on the edge of a cold mountain lake, and it is filled with wonderful fountains that have healing properties. It's said that these waters can fix not only injuries, but also things such as the inability to speak, insanity, restoring your life energy itself, withered limbs, and more. As such, it's also a ground for lots of healers and hospitals and such things, and many seek to get all the way up to this 5th layer to find Empyrean in order to heal some ailment. This is again another perfect hook to get your party started on a quest to Mount Celestia. Perhaps one of your party had a severe injury, an injury that perhaps is beyond the abilities of the particular magic that they have. Seeking this city, seeking this place, could be their recourse in order to find what they need in order to get healing. The 6th layer is called Yovar, the glittering heaven. And here the hills are just scattered with literal gems. There's all types of rubies and garnets that reflect the light in such a beautiful way that it takes your breath away. Many celestial entities just wander this amazing place and contemplate their previous lives, just basking in the beauty of this amazing place. It's on this layer that you'll find the heavenly city of Yetzirah. Yetzirah is the one place which is actually visible from lower layers in some way, shape, or form. Depending on where you stand at lower layers, you can actually catch a glimpse of this beautiful heavenly city. And it's actually visible from anywhere on Yovar. Mirroring the plane itself, the city is a 7-layered ziggurat. And at each of its 4 sides, there's staircases which connect the different layers. Every part of this ziggurat is made up of gems and precious stones. And not only do they reflect the beautiful light, they all glow inherently themselves. There's a few notable locations in this particular city. One is the Radiant Arsenal, which is on the 4th layer of this particular 7-tiered ziggurat. And this is a building which literally just has all sorts of extremely powerful magic weapons in order to arm the celestial beings if necessary. This could be where that particular legendary bow or other legendary artifact is found that your party is trying to get. There's also a bridge on the highest level called the Bridge of Al-Sahal. And it is just a beam of incredibly bright light. The Manual of the Planes for 3.5, which again is where I'm sourcing almost all of this information since none of this has been canonized for 5th edition yet, uses portals a lot for getting from one layer to the next. And it counts this bridge as the portal to the 7th layer, because we're on the 6th layer of Celestia now, and it counts this particular bridge as the portal to the 7th heaven. And it's guarded by a particular powerful angel, a Solar, which guards this place and turns away all who aren't worthy to enter the highest level. Speaking of the 7th layer of Mount Celestia, that's called Cronius, or the Illuminated Heaven. And honestly, there's not really much to say, because it's a mystery. There is almost no one who ever makes it there, and everybody who does never leaves. Legend says that those who enter there that are evil are extinguished and are permanently erased from the multiverse. But if you enter and are worthy, your soul essentially joins with the plane itself. But no one really knows. It's a mystery. So this particular layer is really up to you and what you want it to be. But those 7 layers, Lunia, Mercuria, Vinia, Solania, Mercian, Yovar, and Cronius, all have their own unique aspects, and all could be used interestingly in this quest-type story that you could so amazingly tell using this particular plane. But as beautiful as it is, I think it's about time to wrap up this segment of the show and head over to the wilds. right, we're out here in the wilderness. Well, not so much the wilderness, because it looks like we're back in Mount Celestia, because today we're going to be talking about empyreans. And empyreans are essentially demigods. They're children of the gods in the upper planes. They're celestial beings that are amazingly gorgeous and beautiful and proud. They honestly look like a statue from ancient Greece. They're extremely powerful entities, challenge rating of 23, with features like a 22 armor class, 313 hit points, and true sight of 120 feet, a walk, fly, and swim speed all of 50 feet, and ridiculous stats such as a 30 strength, a 30 constitution, and, of course, its lowest stat, its 21 dexterity and intelligence. So, just a supremely powerful entity, but one that could be used quite effectively in stories. One of the most interesting things about them is that their emotions actually affect the environment around them. That's just how powerful they are, is that whenever they feel something, it manifests itself in the physical reality around them. And they are a little bit moody as well. The monster manual where you can find them on page 130 uses the specific examples of when it's unhappy, the clouds crying tears of salt water, or the wildflowers in surrounding meadows wilting, or fish dying and washing up dead ashore in lakes and rivers, or all the leaves in a forest falling from the trees. But when it's happy, sunlight follows it everywhere. Animals frolic and walk behind them, and birds just fill the sky around them, singing beautifully. I think this particular feature plays well with an entity that the party is required to go find and deal with in a particular way. Since it's an entity that's so powerful and it just manifests its own emotions on the world around them, it can have created a lot of fear, a lot of misunderstanding, or perhaps it's legitimate fear and legitimate concern for well-being because of this particular entity. This particular fact about them, I think, could be used for a pretty interesting quest. Let's say that a particular civilization lives near an empyrean, and they've seen some of these effects, and they're terrified of it. And so the party is tasked to go interact with this being, and it could be that there's legitimate reason to be concerned, that there's legitimate reason for them to be worried about this particular entity being nearby. Or it could be that this is just a misunderstanding, and that the Empyrean wants nothing but peace, but because of these particular emotions, has had some effects which have caused this misunderstanding. And so the party has a choice of either going in guns blazing and just felling this entity, or creating a really interesting social encounter. Sometimes, though, these entities become legitimately evil. This can happen either from being corrupted or being cursed, but whatever the case may be, they can't really return to the upper planes, or at least they can't live there for long anymore. So usually what happens in this case is that this particular evil entity will go to the prime material, and they will find a place where they set up a kingdom and rule as just an absolute tyrant. This, I think, would be a fascinating surprise to throw in, where perhaps your party has been aware of this particular civilization and now maybe they're going to deal with it and they're trying to parlay with this particular king, and no one knows exactly what this king is like, and they walk into his throne room and they see this evil empyrean that is just terrifyingly strong. They also have some really interesting combat-related features which make them unique to fight against. Perhaps the most obvious is their bolt attack, which is just literally a plus 15 to hit range spell attack with a 600-foot range that deals 7d6 damage of a type that they are able to choose between acid, cold, fire, force, lightning, radiant, or thunder. That is just an insane range and an insane bonus to attack. And not only can they do that as their action on their turn, but of course, being such a powerful entity, they have legendary actions. And one of their 3 legendary actions is that the Empyrean makes 1 attack. So if your party starts their combat 600 feet away from this entity, by the time 1 round has passed and they've used their full movement and dash action to move 60 feet, he's gotten 4 plus 15 to hit attacks off on them while they're just trying to run at this particular entity. Not exactly something you want to do from range. But up close, they have the legendary action Trembling Strike, where they just take their weapon and smash the ground with it and make essentially an earthquake, where everybody within 60 feet has to succeed on a DC 25 strength saving throw or fall prone. It's got some innate spellcasting abilities like Commune and Earthquake and Firestorm. Surprisingly, it can be very stealthy too, not only just because of its plus 5 bonus to stealth, but also because it has the ability to cast Pass Without a Trace at will. The Empyrean also has a legendary action called Bolster, which make it an excellent head of a celestial army or other army in general. Any creature that's non-hostile to it within 120 feet with no limit on the number is immune to being charmed or frightened until the end of the Empyrean's next turn, and they gain advantage on all ability checks and saving throws. That is an extremely powerful ability if this Empyrean is leading an army of even minions. That's one of those abilities where you have to read a couple times as a DM and you're like, really? Is there really no limit on the number that I can do here? But no, it's all non-hostile creatures within 120 feet of it. They really are just extremely interesting combat encounters. And not only for all of their stat block abilities, but they also fight with ferocity because they refuse to believe that they're going to die. They are, in fact, immortal in the fact that they don't age, and if they're slain, they go back to whatever particular plane they come from, and one of their parents resurrects them unless they, for some reason, have a good reason not to, in which case they can choose not to. So they're also interesting just because they just fight and don't stop fighting. They don't have any fear. So if you are planning on heading over to Mount Celestia anytime soon, why don't you include an Empyrean as one of the challenges for them proving their worth? It'll really be an interesting encounter. But I think that's about enough time out here in the wilds. Let's head over to the tavern and get some refreshment. Alright, back in the friendly confines of the tavern. Today our plot hook is, what would you do if your map was fake? Now this is something that I would never do for no reason, because you've essentially April Fool's your party at that point. You don't really ever want to just say, haha, the information I gave you was wrong, without a good reason for it. Otherwise you'll just quickly burn down that trust between you and your players. But there are some good ways that you can actually do this. The party could have been given a map by an NPC as part of perhaps a quest that they were heading on for this particular entity, only to find out that it didn't quite lead them where they were expected to go. Perhaps they got lost, or maybe the destination that they were supposed to head towards ended up not being where they actually ended up. It could be used as a tool to lure them into an ambush, or just as a tool to get them lost, or to get them out of a particular location. Perhaps this entity that gave them the map is actually involved with the crime syndicate that they're trying to stop, and so gave them a map which sent them in the wrong direction, so they ended up staking out the wrong house or the wrong location in the woods, while the real meeting went on without a hitch somewhere else in the vicinity. You could perhaps have a situation where maybe the map itself was accurate, but there was information that was left off. Think Episode 2 of Star Wars, where the planet Camino had been erased from the Jedi archives so that no one knew that it was there. Perhaps that's been done to the official maps of a particular country so that a particular location is more highly restricted than perhaps it otherwise would be. This is something that wouldn't necessarily come up in gameplay for a very long time until they happen to come across this area. And then all of a sudden, whatever reason behind the particular hiding of this information was there, all of a sudden comes back to the forefront in the campaign. Having an inaccuracy like this on a map can just be one of those little seeds that can be there in your particular campaign, waiting until the right moment when it can germinate and be triggered and actually turn into an actual active story point. You could also have the reverse be true, where the map has a place that's on it which just doesn't exist. Perhaps this is used by a political rival to say, we have good relationships with this particular state over here, and when in reality all the documents that they have which show the good relationships that they've built with these entities are forged, and this city which they're purporting to have helped and been good philanthropists with really just doesn't even exist. And going to this particular location and discovering that this place is not legitimate, that this city is not real, can really ramp up the political intrigue even further. But there's lots of different ways you could take this, which can be, again, just those little seeds which can be planted in your campaign until it just germinates and comes to life. But I think that just about wraps up this episode of Plot Hooks. Please remember to check out our Patreon tomorrow to look at our new supplement coming up. We hope you all really enjoy it. And thanks, of course, for listening. From all of us here at Plot Hooks, I'm Samuel. Thanks from Matt, Mike, Steve, Dave, Zach, Becca, and of course, podcast pupper Ellie. We'll see you all again next week for another episode of Plot Hooks.